they're banning our corals. What a lie. The reality is they love our corals and they're happy to pay more for them because we do it well. We don't go and cyanide our reefs. We don't use dynamite. We don't use any of those techniques used overseas. We use net caught fish collection. We use sustainable one coral over here, one coral over there. And then the various collectors have got areas where they like to collect, and they don't want to remove all of a certain colour. They want it to be sustainable so they can keep collecting. And if they take a little bit here and a little bit there, it is sustainable. The UK has since loosened its restriction, but the EU remains like, this is just fear-mongering. Okay, at present, 20 Australian coral species are banned from import to the EU. Maybe that's true. I Googled 5, but if so be it. So what if there's 20 species they don't want? I think that's absolutely their business. But once again, there's hundreds and hundreds of species available. So the way that they're writing this makes it look like that's a thorn on us. It's not. It's probably just a good decision that they made for themselves. The EU says the reason for the restriction is insufficient evidence. The trade is sustainable. Probably also those particular species don't travel well to the EU. Mr. Squire insists the EU doesn't understand how the wild harvesting industry in Australia operates. Absolutely. The people that are concerned about this stuff generally know nothing about it. It's very easy to freak people out that don't know what they're talking about. Since 2016, the Great Barrier Reef has experienced 5 mass bleaching events, which occurred when the coral becomes stressed and turned white. Yes, it has. And if you go back to all of those reefs now, you will find they are all thriving. The corals bleach, they turn white. Then when the temperature's right, you lose some, but most of them take their zooanthellae back and go on thriving. Despite these increasingly common, devastating events, coral harvests have actually increased since 2018. Good. That is absolute credit to Australia as long as we keep doing it sustainably like we do. And if someone wants to prove that we can do things better, you know what? We will. So much so that Doctor felt he had to sound the alarm, calling for new limits on how much can be harvested back in 2021. All right, now let's get this straight. I think they said something like 1% of the reef is accessible to collectors and something like 1% of that is actually collected. So if you go doubling, tripling, 3 timesing, or halving what we collect, it makes no difference. It's like the gumball immigration. Let me just put that on. Right now, see this guy. Who's seen this? Immigration, world poverty, and gumballs. That's what we're talking about right now. What we can and do collect from the Great Barrier Reef is 1 gumball. What there is on the Great Barrier Reef is thousands of gumballs. So if you want to jump up and down, Doctor, about 1 gumball or 2 gumballs, good on you. But the reality is our industry is so tiny and our Great Barrier Reef is so big. So we're talking about removing pinches of sand from a bucket. It makes no difference. And if you haven't watched this video on world poverty and gumballs, this is brilliant. Here represents millions of people or thousands of people or whatever it is. And they're saying that if America takes that much, if we take 1 gumball or 2 gumballs, we don't make any difference to poverty. The only way you fix poverty is by fixing the country. The corruption and all the other problems are why the country is the way it is. But taking people into your country is like taking a gumball away from thousands of gumballs. In theory, it's great. In reality, it doesn't make any difference. So increasing or decreasing what we take is absolutely like a gumball compared to gumballs. It's like a pinch of sand out of a bucket. One of the concerns raised by Doctor was that coral species only found on the Great Barrier Reef could be over-harvested. Do you know what, Doctor? The one person that would be concerned about that would be the collectors. The collectors do not want to over-harvest something, meaning they can't harvest it again in the future. And when you meet Lyle Squire and these sorts of guys and you see the way they operate, not only will they make sure that they don't take all of their future profits, they'll try their best to propagate and grow those things in the wild, in the aquarium, so they don't even have to get them from the wild. So this is a totally true statement, but framed in a way that looks bad. But our industry is catering for all that. Popular reefer YouTubers have posted videos about how they like corals from Australia for their uniqueness, with a species known as scollies a favourite. Yes, Australian reefing is very respected and we have great corals and they are very well looked after, and that's why we are a prize to other countries. Now, according to 2024 assessment of the fisheries by the federal government department, scollies have been over-harvested by 17%. Okay, so if that's the case, then I bet you that something's going on about it. And you know what? The fact that we know how many percent it's been over-harvested for would mean that something is being done about it. Because our government puts rules in any time that there's a possibility of a problem. We get 10 new rules all the time. And so they actually have started cracking down on how much we're allowed to remove of certain corals. And if we do remove 17%, percent, 17%, you get 17%. Wow, that's really cheap. 17 of them for a cent. It's a really well written article. If considering I can barely read, what's this person's name anyway? Oh well, Angela. All right, Angela. If you lose your job because you can't write or research, you can have a job here cleaning my fish tanks. We're increasingly convinced that coral does not occur outside of a very small area of the Great Barrier Reef. So it's very vulnerable to overharvest, says Doctor. When I grew up, I used to swim, dive and snorkel around Bribey Island all the time. You never ever saw coral around there. Now, Bob Hawke, I used to look after his fish tanks, and he came up to me one day and he said, so is the coral reef dying? I said, no, Bob, the coral reef is not dying. The only thing the coral reef has ever done is move, evolve and change, and that's all it's doing. There has been some warmer temperatures, and the coral reef is coming south. It will move at a rate faster than you think. For example, last time I went swimming in Bribey Island, I saw so many varieties of coral, and I did not see them when I was a kid. And yes, I did look out for them, and I've always been passionate about coral, and you did not see the diversity of coral that you do now. Even swimming in Sydney, sometimes I see corals that there's no way would have been there before. The coral reef moves. It's all it's ever done. It's expanded, it's attracted, it's moved, and that's what it's doing. And when Bob Hawke asked me, is the coral reef dying? I said, no, Bob, the coral reef is just evolving, moving, and changing. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't look after it. We should do everything we can to look after it, but it will evolve. It was there way before us, and it will be there way after us. And I told Bob, the coral reef is slowly coming south. And Bob said to me, and where he lived, because I used to do his fish tank at Northbridge, and then he pointed down to his jetty, and he said, so you're telling me that one day this could be a coral reef waterfront? I said, well, maybe. And then Bob went on to laugh and say, well, that's pretty good for Sydney tourism. Yeah, in millions of years, that might be right. Anyway, end of the day, the coral reef is moving, and the coral reef has abilities to survive and adapt way beyond our understanding. Those harvest levels are at unprecedented levels, okay? As long as it is sustainable. And if it isn't, it is the industry itself that will regulate it. While conducting the research in 2024 assessment, Doctor also noticed fewer colourful, smaller sized corals through the reef, subject to fishing when compared to unharvested reefs. Now, I don't know if I agree with that at all, but that's just his opinion, so good luck to you, dude. I reckon that when I've been out, I've seen, if anything, more beautiful corals. But once again, that's all someone's opinion, so whatever. We don't know what genetic attributes they're selecting when they are selecting these really bright, ultra-master grade corals, he says. If they happen, for example, to be one that have the greatest thermal resistance, then we might leave that remaining population really compromised. Doctor believes stricter harvest limits may be warranted in some parts of the reef. Sure. If if they see evidence of problems, then closing certain parts of the reef would be a great idea. And you know what? A lot of the Great Barrier Reef is so massive, and there's so many reefs, that the collectors don't want to keep going back to the same reefs all the time anyway, and they don't even have the capacity to go anywhere near all the reefs. So the collectors themselves already do that. So if someone banned a certain reef for a period of time, no one would be against that. If we find any issues of non-sustainability, then we are very interested as an industry, because we want to do it sustainably. That's why we all need to work on the same page, and we need to celebrate what a great job we're doing. We don't need to create scare campaigns that freak out the public and make them think we're doing the wrong thing when we're actually doing everything in our power to do the right thing. And the people are getting in trouble. You need more information to effectively justify the ongoing harvest, let alone increased harvests, he says. He is calling on the industry to reinvest some of its profits into collecting data to demonstrate its sustainability. Well, there's massive amounts of data that are being collected by the collectors, and it's getting stricter and stricter with the data, and it's all going to the fisheries, so that is absolutely happening. But Mr. Squire says coral harvesters can't afford to do that. Yes, the universities and other people do all that stuff. It would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to collect the level of detail in data in order to be able to say categorically whether or not the fishery is sustainable, he says. Now, Lyle knows the fishery is sustainable, and the amount of data that the fisheries is making people like Lyle collect is increasing more and more and more. And once again, the industry collects a huge amount of data for its capacity, and it should be applauded for what it does, not put down. Industry does not and will never make enough money to be able to support that research. That's right. Nor should they. The government and universities and so forth need to look at that, because every other industry they need to contribute, and the industry does contribute, but it's not actually the industry's